Napolitano, this is a very busy day with some of these major issues, and we didn't even touch on some of the other stuff we're talking about.
But it is rare that the President of the United States actually can affect the welfare of children, individual children, by the stroke of a pen, and I hope he does it.
And it sounds like he is absolutely going to.
And
Thanks
he cares,
to everyone
and he cares
on the couch.
about the dreamers.
Thanks so much to the judge. We're back on the couch at noon Eastern tomorrow. Right now, here's Melissa Francis in for Harris.
Fox News alert, we could be a step closer to seeing a fix for the brewing crisis at the border. Welcome to Outnumbered Overtime. I'm Melissa Francis, in today for Harris Faulkner. Breaking developments out of Washington. President Trump signaling that he is ready to take executive action to allow migrant families to stay together, with tensions over the issue running high. This, as Speaker Paul Ryan says, the House will vote on a measure tomorrow that also addresses the problem, which has become a political flashpoint, as you know. The president speaking on the dilemma of signing such a measure at the White House just minutes ago.
The dilemma is that if you're weak, which some people would like you to be, if you're really, really pathetically weak, the country's going to be overrun with millions of people. And if you're strong, then you don't have any heart. That's a tough dilemma.
And now we are waiting to hear from Democratic lawmakers at any moment who have blasted the president's zero-tolerance crackdown at the border. We've also just learned a short time ago that Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen will head to Capitol Hill within the next couple of hours in order to talk to Republican lawmakers and answer questions about the immigration bill. It is an extremely busy day in our nation's capital with a lot of moving parts. No one better to talk to now than Chief White House Correspondent John Roberts with more on the North Lawn. Break it down for us, John.
Well, you could get better. You could talk to the president directly, but we have, I think, a pretty good handle of what's going on. The president is looking for a fix for this. The open question is, what will this fix be? Because the president has said that he wants to make sure that people who cross the border illegally are prosecuted for the crime of crossing the border illegally, but he doesn't want the families separated. So we assume that this fix is going to be some sort of executive order that allows children to remain detained with their parents through the immigration adjudication process. Listen to what the president said just a short time ago.
The Republicans want security and insist on security for our country, and we will have that. At the same time, we have compassion. We want to keep families together. It's very important. I'll be signing something in a little while that's going to do that, and the people in this room want to do that, and they're working on various pieces of legislation to get it done. But I'll be doing something that's somewhat preemptive, but ultimately will be matched by legislation.
All right, so let's take that apart just a piece at a time here, Melissa. First of all, on the legislative front, the president was up talking to the House Republicans yesterday about two bills that are before the House, will likely be voted on tomorrow, the Good Lab bill and a compromise bill that would handle the problem of children being separated from their parents. It would also address DACA, border security, funding for the wall, a number of other issues as well. The president, we're told from folks on Capitol Hill, didn't give exactly full-throated support for either one of those measures. So the Secretary of Homeland Security is asking the president to get behind this, saying that the White House needs to get one of these bills passed, particularly with the political firestorm that has erupted over all of this. And that if neither one of those bills either passed the House or the Senate, because there's a question whether they're going to pass the House, let alone the Senate, then the president should probably consider the idea of a standalone bill to close the loopholes. All right, now let's look at this executive order that the president is expected to sign. If he signs an order that mandates or allows at least children to stay detained with their parents through the entire immigration adjudication process, that is likely to run afoul of a July 2015 court ruling by a district judge in California, Judge Donna G., who told the Obama administration that they could only hold children for a certain amount of time, that period being about 20 days, before the children had to be turned over to HHS or the family unit had to be released. The president doesn't want to release these family units, so it's likely he's going to try to enact some measure here that will allow those children to be detained. But if that runs afoul of that ruling from 2015, they either need to get Judge G to overturn that part of her ruling, or they're likely going to face court action on it as well. And Melissa, just to show you how similar the situation is now to the situation it was during the Obama administration, Judge G issued that ruling citing widespread deplorable conditions the children were being held in during the Obama administration. Melissa?
It's incredible. What is your sense of, so these two bills that they're looking at on the Republican side, the good, lot, and the compromise, how much support do each of them have? How realistic is it that either of them could really pass?
I think the compromise bill's probably got a better chance of passing, but obviously the good light bill, being a more conservative bill, is going to have the support of more measures of organizations like the House Freedom Caucus. So it's an open question as to whether or not either one of them will even pass the House. But the chances for them passing the Senate really are very unlikely, which is why the Secretary of Homeland Security is proposing this idea of a Plan B, which would be a standalone loopholes bill. It's something that John Cornyn, who was just here at the White House, and Mitch McConnell were talking about yesterday. There's not actually language for such a bill, but if either the good light bill or the compromise bill fail, they're going to have to get something together pretty quickly, because there are people in this administration who believe if the president does try to keep children and families together, the ACLU or immigrant groups or somebody is going to immediately file an injunction or file for an injunction against that, saying it runs afoul of this 2015 ruling, which is based on a 1997 consent agreement called Flores v. Reno. So, I mean, this goes all the way back to the Clinton administration, this intractable problem of children and their parents.
What a mess. All right, John, thank you.
Thank you.
Our first guest has been at the forefront on immigration compromise and introduced a bill that addresses family separation, dreamers, and border security. Republican Congressman Jeff Denham of California joins us now. What do you think is the solution at this moment?
Well, first of all, I think that it's important that we keep families together. As a father, I know that I would always fight to keep my kids safe, keep my kids with me. And that is a big part of not only this compromise, but it's part of the language we put into the compromise bill. My Democrat colleagues, while they've been very frustrated with executive orders, all of a sudden think that this is something that can be done constitutionally. Congress needs to do its job, and that's why we need to pass a bill this week on the floor to get this done.
Right, and you talk about being a father and that you don't want to see people separate from their children, but what about those 10,000 kids that are in custody? Their parents, or at least most of them, thought it was a better idea to put their kids in the care of strangers and take the chance getting into this country than stay where they are. What do you say about a system where that's their best option?
Well, certainly our immigration system is broken. This doesn't deal with those that are seeking asylum. It certainly does not deal with those unaccompanied minors that are coming across, not just right now, but every summer during these summer months.
How do you deal with that? What's the solution?
Well, ultimately, I think that we've got to have expedited due process to make sure that we have the judges available. So rather than saying your court date is 2 years from now or a year from now, that we actually have due process right there on the border.
So do you support something like Senator Ted Cruz was talking about, where you have 72 hours from the time that you arrive and you get your time in front of the judge?
I think that's important. Absolutely. That's expedited due process.
Do you think that there's a way, or have you guys talked about trying to figure out if these children really are the children of the adults that they're with, or if they're with smugglers or whatever it might be?
Yeah, and certainly that's a challenge. I mean, when somebody illegally crosses the border, whether they've got forged paperwork or no paperwork at all, trying to figure out the safety of the child and who they should actually be released to, verifying who their parents or relatives are, can be a challenge.
And so what do you do with the kids that are already in custody, that are already separated, those 10,000? How do you solve that problem?
It is always a big growing problem, especially in these summer months, but we already have current law that addresses that. We need to make sure that as we move forward, not only are we fixing our system with dreamers, which we have in this bill, but actually having greater border security so these guys aren't putting their lives in danger crossing the border, hoping that they're going to get detained and then sent a plane ticket somewhere else.
Do you think that either the good lab bill or the compromise bill could actually become law? Could they make it all the way through, or is that hopeless?
I think the whip count on the good lap bill for quite some time, the initial judiciary bill, the reason it's been held up is because it does not have the votes. The compromise bill, I think, is getting very, very close. Obviously, members still want to read the most recent version of this bill, but I would say that we're very close, and I think it's our best bipartisan way to get through the Senate and have something the president supports.
Are you comfortable with the idea that by virtue of having the president solve this problem with his executive pen, you are ceding your power to the president, that this is really up to you, and that you're ceding your responsibility to him, rather than our founding fathers wanted you guys to write the laws and figure this out, and you haven't been able to do that, and the American people are frustrated. Are you comfortable ceding your power to the president?
No, I disagreed with executive orders under the previous president. I think Congress has to do its job. Part of the reason that we're here is an unconstitutional executive order that created the whole DACA system. Congress is the one that does laws, makes laws. We need to do our job. And ultimately, it took a discharge petition to force a new timeline to get us to this point today. But ultimately, we've got to have not only a compromise, but it shouldn't be a bad thing to have something that is bipartisan, that it's an American solution.
No, everybody wants to point at the other team and say they're the ones holding it up. I hope you guys are able to get it together. Congressman, thanks for joining us. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
For more on the legal fallout from all of this, joining us now is immigration attorney Francisco Hernandez. So what do you think about...
How are you?
Thank you for joining us. What do you think about this solution, potential solution of having a shorter time period, maybe 72 hours, you have the hearing down on the border? Does that solve the problem or no?
It doesn't solve the problem. You got to pass a bill to try to get this done. Really, the solution is much more simple. The problem here is the Pottery Barn rule applies. We broke it, now we buy it. All we have to do is give out 1 year worker permits, renewable year to year, for them to show up and renew, show that they're paying taxes, and then they can process their asylum application in due course. There's no reason to rush. Do you guys realize how much it's costing us to house all these adults and children? Just put a dollar value to that. It's going to it's going to cripple us into paralysis.
Educate us on what goes on down at the border, since you are an immigration attorney. We have these 10,000 kids that are in custody that did not arrive here with their parents. What happens to them?
Well, it's what I call the baby's Moses, okay? Just as you earlier commented, parents do prefer that their children be up here, even in foster care, rather than a lawless nation like Honduras, where adolescent boys and girls are being drafted into the cartels and the criminal gangs. So in a sense, yes, they are sending them, and under existing law, these children, if they're classified as victims of child trafficking, they can get their papers here. We've got to deal with it. The problem is that once they get to the border, there is no turning back. By the time these folks get to the border, they've already paid the smugglers. People have already made sacrifices. There is no turning back. We've got to address this at the source, in the source countries, and figure out a way to keep people from wanting to come to the promised land. You can't blame them once they get here.
Well, keep them from wanting to come to the promised land. I mean, they want to come because you just said that they're sitting in a country where their lives are threatened and they're getting drafted into drug cartels. How do we fix the legal immigration system to respect people who want to come to this country, who are in difficult circumstances and would be good citizens?
Yes, well, this is the biggest misconception under the law, is we believe that there's a line forming where people can apply to come here legally to do these labor jobs. We are in a severe labor shortage. We need the manual labor. The problem is there is not a system where these folks can come and apply legally. A bad political asylum process, the system, is actually a legal way. It's not a loophole. It's the law. It's a bad law. It needs to be fixed. I agree, but it's the only way they can do it.
So what does that look like, though? If they were to sit down and write something, what does it look like to help people come to this country legally? Who, as President Trump always says, we want people, we need people, we want the right people, we want to be choosy. How do you do that physically?
You get physically, you establish a process where an employer can apply in interview. We've got a somewhat H-2B system, but there's only 30 or 60,000 visas issued per year. Okay, you expand that. Okay, but both parties are going to oppose that because it's not a politically saucy or salty solution. The best solutions are the simplest. There's either a job or there's not. You either paid your taxes or you didn't. You make it a year-to-year renewal. That way they don't feel like they have to bring their wives and their children over here. The breadwinner can come to the country, make money, go back, rebuild the country, and that's how you destroy the criminal element at the source country. Because if people have a way of making a living, educating their children, creating a better life in their source country, they won't have to join the gangs. It will disable the gangs.
Interesting. Francisco Hernandez, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll have much more on these immigration developments with our power panel as we await President Trump to sign that executive order to keep migrant families together at the border. Plus, we're now learning that FBI official Peter Strzok was escorted from the agency's headquarters amid an ongoing investigation into his anti-Trump texts. Now, some lawmakers say they want him to testify before Congress, but how likely is that?
I think if he were to come before the Congress, I think it would be nationally televised theater where this guy was probably tripping all over himself. But I definitely welcome it, and I think that he should do that.
Department IG report on the Hillary Clinton email probe. Now House Republican Mark Meadows is unmasking 2 of the 5 FBI investigators cited in that report for expressing anti-Trump sentiment in work-related instant messages. One of the agents, who Meadows identifies as Sally Moyer, writing after the 2016 election, quote, expletive Trump. You can guess what that means. The other agent, identified as Kevin Kleinsmith, writing about the election, quote, I am numb. I am so stressed about what I could have done differently. Kleinsmith also had worked on Mueller's Russia team. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live in Washington with the latest. Catherine.
Well, thanks, Melissa. During yesterday's marathon testimony from the Justice Department Inspector General Michael E. Horowitz, in the final minutes of that hearing, one Republican lawmaker unmasked 2 more FBI employees who sent anti-Trump, pro-Clinton instant messages on the FBI's internal network. Congressman Mark Meadows said they were not agents, but worked in the general counsel's office. That's the FBI's top lawyer. And the FBI was wrong, he said, to ask for the identities to be concealed.
You had a dialogue between FBI Attorney 1 and 2.
Correct.
And those 2 attorneys, do they not work for Trish Anderson?
Those 2 attorneys work in the Office of General Counsel.
Yeah, and so would one of those attorneys be Sally Moyer?
I'm going to defer to what the FBI.
But they don't work in counterintelligence. I mean, if that's the reason the FBI is giving, they're giving you false information because they work for the general counsel.
They were talking
Is
about,
the other one Kevin Kleinsmith?
They were talking about the other attorney there that we have their text messages in here that they were concerned about, along with the other 2.
So while the focus has been on the anti-Trump text messages that were exchanged between FBI agent Peter Strzok and the FBI lawyer Lisa Page, and to be clear, those were on FBI government phones, there also appeared to be additional instant messages from the FBI's internal network that also reflect some political bias, and that was in the opinion of the Inspector General. The congressman said the lawyers are among the 5 FBI employees who have been referred by Horowitz for disciplinary action. Now, also in that same exchange, Horowitz told Meadows that he is looking into allegations that FBI witness interviews, they're known as 302s, were altered. A former agent told Fox News that editing the 302, and it's really considered the FBI's official interview record, was akin to tampering with evidence, although it may not carry the same criminal sanctions. So that's certainly something to watch going forward, Melissa.
Wow. Catherine Herridge, great reporting as always. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's bring in Republican Congressman Andy Biggs. He is from the House Judiciary Committee. Let me ask you first about this Kevin Kleinsmith. Now we know that this is the person that said that they were so stressed. He eventually said about what he could have done differently. What did he do to try and help that he would have liked to have done more of? Or how do you interpret that?
Well, that's exactly the way I interpret it. I interpret it as he's disappointed that his candidate didn't win, that they didn't do more to obstruct the Trump campaign. And so he's basically saying, I wish, I could have it back because I wish I could have done more. And I think that gets to the why so many of us view the IG report with some dash of skepticism, but with relief that he's out there looking and he's pitching. The FBI has masked people to protect them, and they actually ran an investigation that had a predetermined outcome, it looks like. And then they took that whole team, many of those people, and just threw them right into the Russian investigation.
Yeah.
Problematic.
No, and eventually, I mean, we do know that he was eventually removed from Mueller's team when all of this was revealed, but he was on there at the start, and I bet that makes you even more interested in seeing all the documents of how the Mueller investigation, how did they get on this track in the first place, right?
Absolutely. So that's why myself and some colleagues, we've written a series of letters to the IG saying, unmask these people, let us know who they are, give us the documents that we're supposed to have. And you know what? It's beyond time. It's well beyond time. The DOJ and the FBI continue to slow walk. We need to start holding them in contempt. Give them the subpoena, hold them in contempt. Let's get the documents. The American people need it. If we're going to restore it and turn this republic back to the direction it needs to be, this is where you start. You start with your top law enforcement agencies.
And meanwhile, we know that Peter Strzok was escorted from the FBI on Friday. We only just found out about that. What do you read in into the notion that he was escorted out? I mean, it makes it sound like his service weapon was taken from him. That's been, you know, the thought by people that are more familiar with the process. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that we've finally been able to gin up enough public pressure that they're going to actually look at it. The IG said they're looking at it even more. He's recommended more looks at it. Christopher Wray is, I think, sick and tired of the disdain that has come upon the FBI because of Strzok's activities, and they have to go through the legitimate process. But that legitimate process is in some ways been derailed because of Strzok's conduct. So I am grateful that he's out of there. I hope that I hope he's terminated, and there probably should be some criminal prosecution, quite frankly.
Let me ask you really quickly, because Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein did not turn these texts over to you guys, to Congress. It took the IG to go and get them and bring them out into the light of day. They would say it doesn't matter because these people were taken off the case. How do you feel about that? Do you think he has responsibility, or something should be done for the fact that he didn't expose these texts to you all?
Yeah, think about it. He has culpability. He gave certain emails and certain text and electronic messages to the IG. But the big bombshell that when Strzok says we're going to stop it, meaning not the Russian collusion, but the Trump campaign, that one doesn't come out until just basically a few days ago. And why is that? Because Rod Rosenstein, he's the guy that's receiving all these emails and texts, and he's receiving the requests from the IG, and he's not giving them to him. Yeah. This has to come out. That's ridiculous. I'm still very comfortable with impeaching Rod Rosenstein. I think he needs to go.
I don't want to run out of time without asking you the breaking news right now, that there is this report that the president is going to sign an executive order to keep migrant families together. What do you think about that?
Well, I think he's probably doing the right thing. But I think that this is really Congress's prerogative. We need to get something going. That's why I signed yesterday's bill sponsored by Congressman Meadows, coincidentally, to try to solve this asylum problem that we have. But I think President Trump's tired and gets fed up with Congress because we move so slowly, and sometimes events move a little quicker. But I think that he's probably taken the appropriate action for a temporary measure.
It's your responsibility to get the job done up there, so I hope you guys get to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa.
Coming up, former FBI Director James Comey is firing back at Hillary Clinton, saying that she doesn't understand why she was investigated after comments she made. Whether President Trump expected to sign an executive order at any moment that will keep migrant families together at the border. This as the influx of child migrants reportedly prompted authorities to open at least 3 special shelters to hold babies and young children separated from their parents. Jeff Paul is live from one of those so-called tender age facilities in Tornillo, Texas. Jeff.
Well, we're actually near one of the tent cities, pretty far away from those tender age facilities, but I know we do have some crews over there. But I want to kind of set up what's going on over here in Tornillo. We've seen protests, demonstrators, and just regular people showing up here to the port of entry here in Tornillo to see what's going on. In fact, we're hearing about 10 mayors from some of the biggest metro areas like Los Angeles and Miami who are going to be here tomorrow because they're concerned about what's going on just beyond this road over here. That's where those tents have been set up by the government to house some of those younger kids who've been detained. Now, as you take a look at these pictures, you can see these are provided by the government to see what's going on in those tent shelters. No media has been allowed to take any pictures or even go inside. This is separate from what's happening over in McAllen, where some of those younger kids are being housed. We're also learning the government has set up at least 3 of those tender age shelters in South Texas for toddlers. A 4th similar shelter is now in the works and could open up in Houston. And the mayor there says he doesn't want the facility and says it would be enabling an inhumane practice.
This issue is different because this involves our children. This one is different. And there comes a time when Americans, when Houstonians, when Texans have to say to those higher than ourselves, this is wrong. This is just wrong.
Now, in our time out here, we've seen several buses pull up to this port of entry. They enter into that facility and drop off what seems like are several young kids, several groups of those young kids. We have requested to go inside and take a look at what's going on just with our eyes, not cameras, but so far our requests have been denied. Another point I want to make is that we're being told these tent facilities do have air conditioning, but the high today is supposed to be right around 104 degrees. Melissa?
Wow. All right, thank you for that. We're going to talk a lot more about the immigration controversy with our power panel that is coming up a little bit later here on Overtime. Meanwhile, former FBI Director James Comey firing back at Hillary Clinton after the failed presidential candidate commented on the revelation that Comey used a personal email account to conduct official FBI business. So Clinton tweeted, quote, "But my emails," alongside news of the finding. Here's what the former FBI director had to say.
I don't want to criticize her, but it shows me that even at this late date, she doesn't understand what the investigation in her case was about. It was not about her use of a personal email system. It was about communicating about classified topics on that system.
Joining me now to weigh in on all of this is President of Judicial Watch, Tom Fitton. What do you make of this?
Well, when it comes to Hillary Clinton, no corrupt deed goes unpunished. James Comey covered up her email crimes for her. And of course, Hillary Clinton was unhappy with the way he talked about some of what she did. And so she's pushing back against him. And there is some irony because he did improperly use a private email system to do some government business. And on top of that, he's being investigated for mishandling classified information, just like Hillary was. So in many ways, legally speaking, there are two peas in a pod. But what Hillary Clinton did was egregious beyond all imagination in terms of a cabinet official setting up a separate email system to conduct all of her government business with the purpose of keeping those emails away from the American people without a care about its impact on national security and the public interest.
Does she not have a care, or is she really, because sometimes, you know, when she answered these questions, it did seem like she's really clueless about technology. And that, you know, she sort of kept trying to say to her, when you take something that is classified or secret out of a domain where it's protected and you have it out in another place, it's being exposed. And she would always conflate the idea of like using a Gmail with conducting business on an insecure server. Is there any chance that it's just kind of all technology to her and she needs, you know, like a 10-year-old to come over and sort of set up her system and explain it to her like I do?
No, Yuma Abedin testified to Judicial Watch. It was her idea to have the separate system. She was warned repeatedly by national security officials in her agency, the State Department. We uncovered the documents. The FBI and DOJ covered those documents up, that she was warned repeatedly about the impact of using private devices on in terms of security, and she was contemptuous of that. She called them the security hawks. And even this latest tweet, you know, I'm sure she's having some fun at Comey's expense, but there's nothing fun about what she did. And frankly, she still faces criminal liability if the Justice Department and the FBI are finally going to honestly approach this issue, because we now know the prior investigation had zero credibility and needs to be redone.
So James Comey, his response was that all he was doing is he would sit at home and write a speech for something that he was supposed to do, something innocuous that contained no classified information. He would do it on his own time at home, and then he would email it in from his personal email into his work email to have the work there later when he showed up. That's how he explained it. What do you make of that?
It's the convenience excuse, which is something we've heard from Mrs. Clinton disingenuously. The IG concluded that that was not appropriate. He shouldn't have done it, and it raises questions about responses to congressional inquiries and Judicial Watch FOIA lawsuits, whether his email account personally should have been searched as well. You just can't take anything that James Comey says at face value anymore, and we need some verification, and the FBI and DOJ needs to investigate.
Do you think the American public has the stomach for another investigation? I mean, now to sort of chase down James Comey when he's already out of the public eye, he's already been fired. How relevant is that in your opinion?
Well, he's already being investigated for the mishandling of classified information, and that would be tied to his email use, so it's no big deal to clarify what went on here by investigators in the IG, in the least.
What do you make of now the back and forth between James Comey and Andrew McCabe about whether or not, I guess, Comey knew that Andrew McCabe was communicating with the New York Times and with others that he was giving stories out to? They're both sort of pointing the finger at each other and saying that the other one is lying. You have a lot of experience trying to get documents out of the government to try and prove one way or the other who's telling the truth. What needs to be done there? What do you make of that mess?
You know, it's hard to tell who to believe. I think you can be sure that the leak was inappropriate, and neither of them want to have their fingerprints on it. So it explains that maybe both are pointing fingers in a inappropriate way, or in a way that's not credible, at each other. And again, it's the leak that was inappropriate. McCabe says he has permission. Yeah. Comey says he wants no part of it. Now, in defense of McCabe, we know that Comey improperly leaked the FBI records of the President of the United States. So again, Mr. Comey is the worst witness in terms of credibility.
Although he always says it's not a leak. It wasn't a leak. So there you go. Anyway, Tom Fitton, thank you. Thanks for your time.
You're welcome, Melissa.
President Trump gearing up to sign that executive order keeping migrant families together at the nation's southern border amid backlash over his administration's zero-tolerance policy. What we can expect and the impact it could have on at the border. The president saying a short time ago he'll sign it before he leaves for a rally in Minnesota at 2:30 p.m. Let's bring in our power panel, RNC spokeswoman Kelly McEnany and Zach Petkanis. He is a former Hillary Clinton staffer and former DNC advisor. Kelly, the concern is that, you know, this takes the pressure off lawmakers to do their jobs and come up with a real solution.
It doesn't, and here's why. You know, President Trump's going to sign this, but he's made clear, Mitch McConnell's made clear, Secretary Nielsen's made clear, this requires a legislative fix. But we cannot get there because Chuck Schumer was transparent in his ambitions. He said he will not come to the table because he wants to keep the focus on Trump. That is absolutely sick that Democrats are putting politics above people, above DACA recipients, above children separations, and above American citizens who are plagued by MS-13.
Zach, you know, we know where Chuck Schumer stands, but certainly there are reasonable Democrats that would come over for a good plan, are they not? Who might they be and what would they go for?
I mean, I'm extremely confused. I mean, Donald Trump, Kayleigh, others, even just now Kayleigh, was saying that there's nothing that can be done to help these children except a legislative fix. And Donald Trump is now going to sign an executive order to fix this situation.
Hang on, Zach, hang on. But once we do that, that doesn't solve the larger problem.
But that's not what Chuck. But you just brought up Chuck Schumer, which is not what they were talking
Zach,
about.
Hang on. Let's have a calm conversation about how we can solve this problem.
I'm thrilled, but you can't lie about kids.
Hang on, Zach. Are there Democrats that would come together with Republicans for a legislative solution after the executive order is signed?
Democrats have been talking about having a legislative solution for immigration reform for years and years and years. The stumbling block has been Republicans. And so what Donald Trump tried to do is change things up. He decided in April to announce a new policy that would separate children from their parents in order to hold these kids hostage.
But hold on.
Can I just finish this point?
And then let's try and solve the problem. Go ahead.
No, absolutely. But I think it's important to understand where we are. He couldn't break a logjam. So what he said was, was that I'm going to now separate these kids from their parents.
To create pressure.
To create pressure.
Yeah, we agree.
In order to, you're right. So I mean, how is that not hostage taking? He said, I'm going to only let these kids out of their cages. Can I just finish my sentence?
We agree with you.
He's only going to let these kids out of their cages if Congress comes together and passes their draconian law.
You are telling lies, Zach.
Stop, guys.
You are telling lies.
Stop. That's not true. He's signing the order, and then everybody needs to come together for a bill. Kaylee, do you think either of the bills that we're looking at right now, whether it's the good lot or the compromise, will have the votes to pass? Because I think we can all agree that the system is broken and that we need a new system, and only lawmakers can make the law. Go ahead.
Sure. Yes, I do think that it will pass. I think Republicans will come together. It will be held up in the Senate because Democrats are recalcitrant. They're angry and they resist. But it took me the entirety of your show to correct all of the lies we just heard from Zach. So let me just correct too. The cages, that 2014 picture that an Obama official put out claiming it was from Trump, false. That was from the Obama era. The separation policies did not change. Donald Trump just started prosecuting parents.
Guys, we're not making any headway. Let's not litigate the past. Let's try and move a little bit forward.
There are currently kids that are still separated on the border, so it's not the past, it's the present.
Let me ask you about that. So there are 10,000 kids that are at the border right now who are not with their parents. What do you want? What's a logical solution for them? What would you like to see done?
What we actually need is comprehensive immigration reform that does a couple things. Yeah, but that is a separate issue from what the Donald Trump administration just did, which was to separate kids from their parents.
Tell us about those 10,000 kids. How would you reform the system to take care of them? What's your idea?
The first thing we need to do is ensure a system that allows people to move through the system in an expeditious way, that does not do what these two bills do, which is cut legal immigration, not illegal immigration, legal immigration. That's not how you fix this system. And the first thing we do before we touch anything at all is we need to stop these kids from being held from their parents in cages, which the administration did to get leverage in the immigration
hang on. We're going to take a quick break, and then I'm going to let you respond to that on the other side. Deep breath.
Will stop separating children from their families at the Mexico border. The president also meeting with Republicans yet to commit on an immigration bill as the Homeland Security Secretary heads to Capitol Hill. We're tracking all the breaking news for you in Washington. We'll also be hearing from one Republican hoping his more conservative bill will still be considered. I'll see you at the top of the hour.
Fox News alert for you now. Any moment, President Trump is expected to sign an executive order in order to keep migrant families together at the border. Let's bring our power panel back in. RNC spokeswoman Kaylee McEnany and Zach Buchanan, a former Hillary Clinton staffer and former DNC advisor. Where we left off, Kaylee, you were going to tell us, what do we do about the 10,000 kids who are in custody right now whose parents are nowhere to be found? How do we deal with that?
Right. Well, we need Democrats to act with us in passing more funding to fund those detention facilities. It's being caught up right now because of Chuck and Nancy over on the Hill. You know, I heard Zach talk about Democrats and comprehensive immigration reform. He said Democrats have been talking about this for decades. Well, it's time to start talking. It is time to start doing.
Okay,
you had a filibuster majority and did nothing. It's time. President Trump wants to work with you. He's given you a deal.
So you're saying you keep them in the detention center, that you fund them more and you just keep them down there, those 10,000 kids, for how long?
Expedited removal. You saw Ted Cruz. He has a bill to do all of this in 72 hours and send individuals back to their home countries. You can do both, but we need Democrats.
Zach, is that possible, those 10,000 kids? I mean, how do you figure out who they are and send them back where they came from?
We have a process to do that. But again, I think it is pretty extraordinary that we are just glossing past the current crisis that's there to talk about other things that are more defensible for the Trump administration. The reality is that what is going on right now is a hostage-taking process.
No, we're not glossing, Zach. He's signing the executive order. We're saying, what do we do now from here?
We don't know any of the details of this executive order. We don't know if this is simply moving children into adult prisons to stay with their families on the border. We know nothing about this.
What a
we do
ridiculous
know,
assertion.
What we do know is that Donald Trump doesn't need an executive order to stop these kids. Hold on. Donald Trump does not need an executive order to take these kids out of the detention facilities. He can make a phone call in the same way that he started this process back in April, but he's not. He's doing some big signing ceremony on something that we have absolutely no idea what the actual impact is, and could be actually worse than the actual problem that we have right now. But everyone is just really ready to just move on from the fact, well, kids are currently at this
We're not
moment
moving on from the
separated
fact.
from
We're trying to
their
figure
parents.
out how to actually solve this problem instead of pointing at the other side and screaming that it's their fault and relitigating the past. How do we solve it now at this point? Zach, Kaylee, I'll give you another shot. How do we solve it now at this point? So you've got the 2,000 kids that are there with adults. How do you figure out if the adults that brought them are really their parents? And what if those are people who have already been deported once before? What do you do?
We need, as I said, expedited removal. We need to make sure these detention facilities are humane and these kids are taken care of. We need that. We all agree on that as a baseline. But you know what, Zach? Instead of using this moment to correct so many of the mistruths you just said, I want to use this moment to say one thing, and maybe it will compel Democrats to action. The lives of Kayla Cuevas, Nisa Mickens, we saw their parents at the State of the Union with tears in their eyes. They lost their teenage daughters walking in a neighborhood in Long Island. That should not happen to teenagers in this country. Those are U.S. citizens, and if the laws would have been enforced, they would be here today. Start working with us and stop demonizing this administration.
I agree, but there are no infants that are committing crimes here in the United States. And if you want to talk about a callous reaction to what this administration is doing, just look at what Donald Trump's former campaign manager made fun of, mocked a kid with Down syndrome who was separated from her mother.
Okay. Let's end abortion,
We're out of time.
Sorry about that. Thank you. We'll be right back.
Thank you.